Thank you to today's guest for joining us. This is someone who is a close friend of Anzisha and an educator that I respect tremendously and have worked with before in the past. Some of you who've attended maybe a couple of Anzisha events might recognize him from a panel or discussion that he facilitated. And so, it's really such a tremendous honor to have Mopati Morake joining us for a short conversation. So Mopati, thank you and welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Please, may you tell us a little bit about yourself, the work you do, and then we'll take it from there.
Sure. Yeah, it's always good to reconnect with the Anzisha community. My name is Mopati Morake from Botswana, and I am an educator at African Leadership Academy, where I wear many hats. So I teach in the humanities. I am head of a department, and the bits of work that I've done with Anzisha and African Leadership Academy around sort of steering conversations around the future of education on the continent, how teaching, learning, schools should be different to enable our young people to get work and live lives of dignity, right, and to get our young people to work. So it's exciting to be able to think about those questions in this context and the professional work that I do at ALA.
Great, thank you for that. And so when you think about the kinds of skills and mindsets or knowledge that young people require to navigate that future, what about the educators, right? What are some characteristics you think an entrepreneurial educator should have?
So the way I think about it is, I think about the world we're living in now, in the context of this pandemic, and the leadership that we're seeing. This is an unknown situation. It's an unprecedented situation. It's one that requires a lot of critical thinking. It's one that requires a lot of problem solving. It requires a lot of adaptability, flexibility, etc. It's almost a perfect, if you step back, it's almost like a perfect critical thinking challenge, right? That leaders of schools, leaders of governments, leaders of businesses are all having to use all of their intellectual faculties, all of their kind of emotional intelligence to lead in the situation. It's the perfect case study of critical thinking. And it's the kind of complexity that we want students and therefore teachers wrestling with. I don't know if that makes sense. So if you think about the skills that good leaders now are showing, I ask myself, how can those skills be practiced and inculcated in classrooms? Because if the leaders who are successful now are practicing certain skills, are doing kinds of thinking, are doing kinds of analysis, are doing the kinds of communication, and where did they learn how to do that? Where do they practice how to do that? Even though this is a situation that they didn't study for. And how much better would they be if they had a chance to practice this sort of complex thinking, this sort of messy problem solving in school? So I think if I'm an educator today, I recognize the fact that this level of complexity is going to continue into the 21st century, right? Today it's a health pandemic. It's going to be a migration. It's going to be climate. There are going to be all sorts of complex challenges that we want young people to be solving. So how do you weave that into the classroom? How do you weave those kind of critical thinking challenges into the classroom? So I think an educator who's entrepreneurial is able to present complex problems and create ways for students to really to think about them, wrestle with them, explore them, ask questions about them, and begin to think about doing something about them. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. So if I could build on that, are there any strategies or tips or resources you could recommend to help teachers bring that kind of thinking and problem solving to their classroom? So what can they do to facilitate um, that kind of, I guess, to facilitate engagement with that kind of complexity?
Yeah, I think right now is an opportunity because there are real needs in our communities everywhere. And I wonder what it would look like to have, let's say you're corresponding with your students from afar, to ask them to just go out safely. What are the needs around in your neighborhood, on your block, in your village? Like, what is something that's needed? What are you hearing? And then what can we bring, just kind of go out, observe, listen, ask questions, feed that back to the classroom or the group, ideate, and go do some design thinking, and then come up, and then as a community, as a class, come up with a prototype or an idea for addressing a small scale community need, whether that's in education, whether that's something environmental, whether that's just sustainable way of creating and distributing masks, or food distribution, sanitized food distribution in your neighborhood. There are real problems around us, and there are no answers. And I don't know why we need to necessarily wait for the Ministry of X to give us answers for this problem, when we have roomfuls of really, really bright young people who, if you ask them, how can we help our community, and give them the tools, they can figure out something, or at least try.
Yeah. I think it's so important what you said about there's an opportunity for us as educators to empower young people, or to create room for them to really step up to some of these challenges. In my experience, as a teacher, there's sometimes pressure to have all the answers, and to just always be the holder of knowledge. And I think there's maybe there's something to be said around how, as a teacher, you can step back and be a facilitator of learning, rather than the bearer of all the knowledge. Okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I had a question. You mentioned something about, and it's also a reality that we're now seeing a lot of remote teaching and learning taking place. And I'm curious to hear from your observations or from your experience, what challenges have you seen or encountered in the shift to, for example, online teaching? And related to that, what are some opportunities you have seen?
So we're definitely very lucky to be able to have all of our students online, and we're able to use Zoom without much hitch, and we're able to use Canvas and our learning management platform without much hitch. That said, building engagement, like excitement, engagement is not easy. There's a certain energy that teachers and people in school kind of feed off of when you gather together in a room, in a shared space, and kind of think together, and that's lost when you're all kind of at your offices or in your rooms behind a screen. So kind of engagement is more difficult. Just not being able to see people, it's harder to track if people are learning, right? Because it's harder to gauge facial expressions. It's harder to You can't read people. You can't read the room. So those are the two biggest things. Definitely checking for understanding and seeing if students are with you along the way, and building engagement. And so any teacher who's going to be moving to the online space really needs to think and plan for those, and understand it'll be different, but just plan to mitigate as far as you can. In terms of opportunities, so first thing I'll say is that it really, really forces you to plan better. That's one thing I've learned. To do online teaching well, you rely less on instinct, right? In the classroom, when you know your students and there's the sort of, I guess, this energy that I keep referring to, this magic, you can do stuff instinctually. You can read the room, and it's hard to read the room on Zoom. So you just have to plan very deliberately. So your ability to design a strong learning experience is tested, and I think that only strengthens your teaching because you have to be super intentional. And then, actually, I think if done well, you can give real-time feedback to students in a much more rapid-fire way. So I've seen a couple of colleagues do this, where if you ask a question and ask people to just type it back to you in a sentence or two, or of the answer, it's actually quite easy to see everyone's thinking. It's to kind of walk around a classroom and
check.
Yeah. So if done well, students can get quicker feedback on their learning, which is a gift, and that's really important.
Okay.
In education.
Great. Thank you for that. And so in closing, I guess, what final word of encouragement could you share for educators out there during this time?
I hope this is encouraging. I think this is the opportunity to try things, right? Because you can't do everything. I think online teaching is a bit slower. You're not going to be able to cover as much content, so to speak. And because it's necessarily messy, I think that it gives you license to try something and ask what if. And so I would encourage teachers to approach it with that mindset of like, what we are all testing what maybe the future or some part of the future of education might look like, and so you have license to try something. And that might be, what if I designed this project in this way, or gave this prompt, or asked students to solve this kind of problem? What if I said to students, you know what, okay, we have this need as a school or as a town. I don't know what the answer is, but I want us to think about solving it together and use the skills we've been building, right? So what if your grade 12 class can design a tool or platform to help the grade 9s or the grade 8s learn and prepare, and in doing so consolidate their own understanding? What if the students could be a resource to help each other and help and serve their community, as opposed to just passive beings that need to learn stuff to pass an exam.
Yeah.
So I guess, just use this as a what if moment.
That's brilliant. I think they're definitely, there's something we can all do in our classrooms, and I think it definitely is encouraging for educators to step out of their comfort zones a little bit more, because ultimately, for me, an entrepreneurial educator is one who is constantly seeking to improve, right? They're curious, they have a growth mindset, and also are just constantly seeking to improve their craft. And how better can you do that, right, than practicing and trying and seizing those what if moments that you mentioned.
Absolutely. And then students will see and appreciate that thinking from you, and that's how you inculcate those entrepreneurial mindsets and skills in the students when they see you doing the thinking.
Yeah, great. Well, Mopati, thank you so much for your time and for sharing these nuggets of wisdom. And I wish you the best for the remainder of the school year.
No, Lisa, thank you, and thank you, Team Anzisha, for all you are doing. I encourage everyone to go and download the very young entrepreneur scenario report from Anzisha's website to learn more about this stuff.
Thanks so much, Mopati.